The station was quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet, where people just stopped talking. This was the deep cycle quiet, the artificial midnight that the Velhari Imperial Station forced on every living thing inside it. Every species retreated to their quarters during this time. It was not a suggestion. It was the way things were done. The Velhari made the rules, and everyone else followed them. Commander Laius Voss sat alone in his small quarters on Deck 14, the section they gave to humans. It was not the worst section on the station. That belonged to the Ulm, the gaseous species that nobody wanted to live near. But it was far from the best. The humans had been part of the Velhari Dominion for 40 years now, ever since the submission accords were signed. 40 years of being told to sit down, stay quiet, and be grateful they were allowed to exist at all. Elias was reading intelligence reports on his datapad. There was unrest among the vassal species. The Chivari were unhappy about new trade restrictions. The Drothai were angry about mining quotas on their home world. Small fires everywhere, and the Velhari ignored all of them, because the Velhari ignored everything that did not directly threaten their power. Elias made notes in the margins. It was his job, as a diplomatic attaché, to notice these things, even if nobody ever asked him about them. He was 38 years old. He had gray at his temples that had not been there 5 years ago. Before he became a diplomat, he had been a soldier, a good one. He had fought in the border conflicts on the edge of Dominion space, where human troops were used as frontline shields for Velhari strategic assets. He had watched friends die for an empire that did not bother to learn their names. When the fighting was over, they gave him a medal, and told him to put on a suit and smile at aliens who thought he was barely more than an animal. He did it. He shook hands, and claws, and tentacles. But he never forgot. The light in his quarters changed. It shifted from the soft blue of the deep cycle to a sharp, cold white. Elias looked up from his datapad and saw it standing in the middle of his room. A royal herald. It had not opened the door. It had not walked in. It was simply there, as if reality had made space for it. The herald was a drone made of living crystal. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth, but it spoke, and when it spoke, the words came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls and the floor and the bones of his skull. The queen calls, you will attend. Then it was gone, just like that. The light returned to blue, and the room was empty again, and Elias was sitting there with his datapad in his hands and his heart beating very fast. He set the datapad down slowly. He pressed his palms flat on the table and took a breath. Then another, a midnight summons from the Velhari Queen. He knew what that meant. Every species in the Dominion knew what that meant. In Velhari culture, a summons during the deep cycle carried one of two meanings. It was either the greatest honor a being could receive, or it was a death sentence. There was nothing in between. And there was no record of a human ever receiving either one. Elias stood up. He walked to his storage locker and opened it. Inside, behind his diplomatic robes and his formal wear, there was a garment bag he had not touched in 3 years. He pulled it out and laid it on his bed and unzipped it. His Earth military dress uniform, dark blue fabric with silver buttons, the collar sharp enough to cut. On the left breast, 3 medals from the border conflicts. They had told him never to wear it again after the accords were signed. Human military symbols made the Velhari uncomfortable. They reminded them that humans had once fought back. Elias put it on. He pinned every medal. He looked at himself in the small mirror on the wall and saw a soldier looking back at him. Not a diplomat, not a vassal, a soldier. If fate was calling, he decided, it would meet a human standing upright. He stepped out of his quarters and into the corridor. The station was vast, a city in space, and during the deep cycle, its hallways were supposed to be empty. But they were not empty tonight. Word had already spread, the way it always did on the station, through whispers and chemical signals and vibrations in the walls. The queen had summoned the human. Elias walked through the corridors and felt their eyes on him. The Shivari watched from recessed alcoves, their insectoid bodies clicking softly in the dark. The Ulm drifted at the edges of ventilation shafts, their gaseous forms flickering with colors that meant anxiety and fear. The Drothi stood in doorways like statues, their stone-skinned faces unreadable, but their deep-set eyes followed him as he passed. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody wished him luck. Nobody stopped him to say goodbye. But they watched. Every single one of them watched. And in their watching, Elias understood something. They were not just curious. They were afraid. Because if the queen could summon a human in the middle of the night, she could summon any of them. The corridors grew wider as he moved toward the central spire of the station. The walls changed from dull metal to polished crystal. The air grew warmer and carried a faint scent like flowers and electricity. He was entering Velhari territory now, the heart of the Empire. 2 guards stood at the entrance to the throne antechamber. They were Velhari soldiers, each one 7 feet tall, covered in plates of natural armor that glowed with a soft blue light. They looked down at Elias the way a person might look at an insect that had wandered into their house. But they stepped aside. The queen had called for him, and not even her own guards would stand in the way of a royal summons. Elias stopped in front of the doors. They were enormous, 30 feet high, and carved from a material that the Velhari said came from the core of a dead star. Dark and smooth and impossibly heavy. He could feel the weight of them just by looking. He thought about the people back on Earth who would never know he was here. He thought about the soldiers he had lost in the border conflicts. He thought about 40 years of humanity being told they were not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough to matter in this galaxy. He straightened his uniform. He lifted his chin. 40 years they told us to be quiet, he whispered to himself. Let's see what happens when they finally want us to speak. The throne room was the largest enclosed space Elias had ever seen. It stretched upward and outward in every direction, a cathedral made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. The walls were covered in bioluminescent plants that shifted color in slow rolling waves, like an ocean made of light. Gravity wells bent the architecture in impossible ways. Staircases ran sideways, platforms floated in mid-air, bridges connected structures that should not have been able to stand. And it was full of people. Hundreds of alien dignitaries lined the room in strict tiers, arranged by species and rank and importance. The most powerful stood closest to the throne. The least powerful stood near the walls. Elias did not need to guess where the humans usually stood. There were no humans in this room. There had never been a human in this room. He was the first. The silence hit him the moment he crossed the threshold. It was not normal silence. It was something the Velhari created on purpose, a resonance field that pressed against the mind like a physical weight. Elias felt it immediately, a crushing pressure behind his eyes, a ringing in his ears, a feeling like the air itself was trying to push him to the ground. He saw other vassal species in the lower tiers buckling under it. A Shivari diplomat near the wall had dropped to one knee, her wings folded tight against her body. Elias kept walking. Every step felt like pushing through deep water. The silence was designed to break the will of lesser beings. It was a weapon, and the Velhari used it the way other species used guns. But Elias had felt worse. He had felt the concussion wave of plasma fire on the border. He had felt the pressure of a collapsing bunker. He had felt the weight of carrying a dead friend through enemy territory. He could handle quiet. He walked the length of the throne room, past hundreds of alien faces that stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to contempt to something that might have been wonder. He stopped at the prescribed distance from the throne, a circle of darker crystal set into the floor that marked where supplicants were meant to prostrate themselves. Protocol was very clear about what happened next. He was supposed to kneel, Then he was supposed to press his forehead to the floor. Then he was supposed to wait until the queen acknowledged him, which could take minutes or hours, depending on her mood. Every vassal species did this. Every single one. Elias did not kneel. He planted his feet on that dark circle, stood straight, and brought his right fist to his chest in a human military salute. The sound of his fist hitting his uniform cut through the silence like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the court. These were the sounds of beings who had just seen something they thought was impossible. A Velhari lord in the second tier actually stepped backward. The Chivari diplomat near the wall looked up with her compound eyes wide. And Lord Kethavar, the queen's first blade, her military commander and chief enforcer, moved his hand to the weapon at his side. Kethavar was 7 feet of armored chitin and cold intelligence. He had personally executed more enemies of the Dominion than any living being. He despised humans with a deep and specific hatred that went beyond politics. To him, they were vermin that the queen tolerated for reasons he could not understand. And now one of them was standing in the throne room, refusing to kneel, and Kethavar's fingers were wrapped around the hilt of his blade. But before he could move, the queen acted. A single harmonic pulse came from her wings. It was not loud. It was not even really a sound in the way humans understood sound. It was a vibration that moved through every molecule in the room and said very simply, "Be still." Kethavar's hand froze. The gasps stopped. Everything stopped. Elias looked at the queen for the first time. Queen Sirathale was ancient and enormous. She sat on a throne that grew from the living crystal of the station itself, as if the station had been built around her. Her body was covered in plates of natural armor that glowed with shifting patterns of light, fractals that moved and changed like thoughts made visible. Her wings, folded behind her, were vast enough to fill the room if she spread them. Her eyes were deep and dark and filled with a kind of intelligence that made Elias feel like a child standing in front of something very, very old. She studied him for a long time. The silence in the room was total. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The whole court waited. Then the queen did something that nobody expected. She stood from her throne, and she descended. She walked down from her raised platform, step by step, until she was standing on the same level as Elias. In 300 years of rule she had never done this. The court did not gasp this time. The court was too shocked to make any sound at all. She spoke to him directly, not through a translator cast, not through a herald, not through any intermediary. She spoke to him herself, and her voice was like music played on instruments that had not been invented yet. "Human," she said, "I know what you are." "I know what you are too," Elias replied. Something flickered in her patterns. It might have been amusement. "My dominion is dying," she said. She said it simply, the way someone might say the weather was bad. But the words landed on the court like bombs. Elias heard sharp intakes of breath from the tiers above. This was not something the queen admitted. This was not something anyone admitted. A force from beyond the edge of the galaxy, from the empty dark between galaxies, where nothing was supposed to exist. It was not an army. It was not a fleet. It was a wound in space itself, and it was moving, and everything it touched stopped existing. Not destroyed, not conquered, erased. Stars, planets, entire civilizations, gone as if they had never been. Every fleet the Velhari had sent against it had been wiped out. Every strategy their greatest minds had created had failed. The Void Scar consumed order. It ate logic. It erased patterns. And the Velhari were the most ordered, most logical, most pattern-dependent species in the galaxy. They could not fight something that destroyed the very foundation of how they thought. "But humans," she said, "humans were different. Your species is chaos," she told him. "You are unpredictable, irrational. You fight when you should surrender. You laugh when you should weep. You create things that serve no purpose and destroy things that you need. You are everything my dominion has tried to contain for 40 years. She paused. The fractals on her armor shifted to colors Elias had never seen before. And you may be the only thing that can save us. She offered him a choice. Lead a combined fleet against the Void Scar with full tactical control, something no non-Velhari had ever been given. Or refuse, and watch as humanity was used as a shield, sacrificed to buy the Dominion time. The room waited. Kethavar's hand was still on his blade. The Chavari diplomat, Ambassador Taylani, watched from the lower tier with an expression that was impossible to read. Elias looked at the queen. She was taller than him by 3 feet. She could kill him with a thought. She ruled an empire that had kept his species in a cage for 4 decades. And she was asking him for help. But I have conditions. The court erupted. Voices and clicks and vibrations filled the room from every tier. Lord Kethavar drew his blade halfway from its sheath, his eyes burning with fury. A vassal did not make conditions. A vassal accepted what was given and was grateful. The queen raised one hand and the room fell dead silent. The patterns on her armor shifted to a color that no one in the court had ever seen. Not in 300 years. The translators could not identify it. The scholars in the upper tiers leaned forward, trying to understand. Speak them, the queen said. The staging grounds sat at the edge of Dominion space, and they were the ugliest place Elias had ever seen. Behind them, the stars burned steady and bright, the safe and ordered galaxy that the Velhari had built over centuries. Ahead of them, the stars were wrong. They flickered, they dimmed. Some of them were simply gone, leaving dark patches in the sky like missing teeth. The Void Scar had already been here. It had already taken worlds, erased civilizations, and moved on. What remained was a graveyard of shattered fleets and dead systems. This was where they gave Elias his army. The fleet was not impressive. It was a collection of old warships, damaged cruisers, and vessels that other commanders had rejected. The crews were worse. Some were volunteers, mostly from the lesser vassal species who had nothing left to lose. Others were prisoners, criminals, and political dissidents who had been given a choice between the fleet and execution. The Velhari did not send their best people on suicide missions. They sent the ones they could afford to lose. Elias looked at what he had been given, and he smiled, because the Velhari had made a mistake. They had given him the desperate ones, the angry ones, the ones who had been pushed down and forgotten. And those, in his experience, were exactly the kind of people who fought the hardest. His second-in-command arrived on the 3rd day. Lieutenant Mara Osei stepped off a transport shuttle, with grease on her hands and fire in her eyes. She was a combat engineer, one of the best humanity had ever produced. She could build a weapon out of scrap metal and bad intentions. She had been stationed on a mining colony in the outer systems, far from anywhere important, because she had a habit of telling Velhari officers exactly what she thought of them. They told me this was a suicide mission, she said to Elias as she walked across the hangar. Probably, he said. Good, she said. I was getting bored. The queen had also assigned him a bodyguard. Vrenek was a Drothi, one of the stone-skinned warriors from a heavy-gravity world near the galactic core. He was massive, nearly 8 feet tall, with skin like rough granite and eyes like chips of amber set deep in his skull. The Drothi were an old species, older than the Velhari, and they had a code of honor that made them impossible to bribe, threaten, or break. Vrenek was not happy about his assignment. He stood in Elias's quarters on the first day, arms folded across his enormous chest, and made his feelings very clear. I have fought in wars that lasted longer than your species has existed, he said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. I do not take orders from children. You don't have to take orders from me, Elias said calmly. The Queen told you to keep me alive. That's different from following me. Just make sure I don't die and you can think whatever you want about me while you do it. Vrennik stared at him for a long time. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a small earthquake. He said nothing else, but he did not leave. The real problem started on the fourth day, when the Velhari officers arrived. The Queen had given Elias full tactical authority. It was in the official orders, sealed with the royal frequency. But the Velhari officers assigned to the fleet did not care about orders. They cared about pride. A human commanding a Velhari warship was an insult that went beyond politics. It was an insult to their biology, to their culture, to every instinct that told them they were the superior species. The highest-ranking Velhari officer was Captain Sorvain, a decorated veteran with 3 campaign marks on her carapace. She stood in the command center on the 5th day and announced to everyone present that she would not take orders from a human. Several other Velhari officers stood behind her. It was a mutiny, polite and formal, but a mutiny all the same. Elias could have argued. He could have waved the Queen's orders in their faces. He could have threatened them with treason. Instead, he did something nobody expected. You're right, he said. Why should you follow me? I'm just a human. So let me prove it. He pulled up a battle simulation on the main display. The Void Scar encounter, modeled on all available data. He loaded the standard Velhari tactical doctrine and ran the simulation. The fleet engaged using perfect formation, coordinated strikes, logical withdrawal patterns. Every move was textbook. Every decision was optimal. The fleet was destroyed in 14 minutes. Total annihilation. Every single time. Elias reset the simulation and loaded his own plan. It looked like madness. Ships moving in seemingly random patterns. Formations breaking apart on purpose. Weapons firing at nothing. Deliberate chaos. Coordinated disorder. Strategy built on the absence of strategy. The simulation ran. Ships were lost. Many ships. But when it ended, 31% of the fleet survived. He ran it again. 28%. Again. 34%. Captain Sorvain stared at the numbers. 31%, she said, and her voice was full of contempt. Your doctrine gives this fleet a 0% chance of survival, Elias said. He kept his voice calm and steady. I just gave them a 31% chance. That is 31% more hope than they had when I walked in. You can hate me for the way I fight, or you can help me save the people on these ships. Your choice, Captain. Sorvain said nothing. She looked at the numbers for a long time, then she turned and walked back to her post. She did not salute, she did not agree, but she sat down at her station, and she did not challenge him again. In the days that followed, Mara unveiled the weapons she had been building in secret since she arrived. She called them echo bombs, and they were the strangest devices Elias had ever seen. They did not explode. They did not shoot. They broadcast. Each one contained a dense package of contradictory data, things that made no logical sense, things that could not be categorized or predicted. Human music. Random number sequences recorded by children pressing buttons. The sound of rain on a tin roof. Old poetry read in dead languages. Static. Laughter. The noise of a crowded market on Earth. A dog barking at nothing. The Void Scar eats order, Mara explained, her hands covered in wiring as she assembled another bomb. It consumes patterns, so we give it the most unpattern-like thing in the universe. Human noise, human mess, the stuff that makes absolutely no sense to anyone, including us. Vrennik watched her work with a strange expression on his stone face. One evening, when the staging grounds were quiet, he approached Elias in the observation bay. I have a question, the Drothi said. Your fleet is outnumbered. Your enemy cannot be killed. Your chances of survival are less than 1 in 3. Why do you fight? Elias leaned against the viewport and looked out at the broken stars. Humans have this concept, he said. We call it a last stand. It's when you know you're going to lose, and you fight anyway. Not because you think you'll win, because the act of fighting is the point. Vrenek considered this. My people have a similar concept. We call it the final stone. It is when a Drothi stands alone against an enemy they cannot defeat, and they choose to stand rather than run. Then you understand, Elias said. I am beginning to, Vrenek said quietly. On the 7th day, the fleet departed. 243 ships of different sizes, shapes, and species, held together by desperation, anger, and the thin thread of a human's impossible plan. Behind them, the Dominion watched through long-range sensors. The Valhari High Command had already written them off. The funeral rites for the fleet were drafted before they left the staging grounds. Mara stood beside Elias on the bridge of the command ship, as they crossed into the dark space between the safe stars and the dead ones. The sensors screamed warnings. The temperature dropped. The lights flickered. Reality itself felt thin here, like a piece of paper held up to a flame. It knows we're here, Mara said, looking at the readings on her console. Elias gripped the edge of the command console. He thought about every human who had ever been told they were too small, too weak, too chaotic to matter. He thought about every species on this fleet that had been thrown away by the Dominion like garbage. Good, he said. Let it be afraid. The Void Scar did not look like anything. That was the worst part. Elias had fought enemies he could see, enemies with ships and weapons and faces. The Void Scar had none of these things. It was an absence. A place where the universe simply stopped. Stars ahead of the fleet burned bright and steady, and then there was a line, invisible but felt in the gut like a drop in pressure. And beyond that line there was nothing. Not darkness, not empty space. Nothing. The kind of nothing that hurt to look at, because the human brain could not understand what it was seeing. The fleet slowed as it approached the threshold. Elias stood on the bridge and felt the change in the air. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The lights flickered again. A low vibration ran through the hull. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling, like the ship itself was afraid. All ships report ready, Mara said from her station. Her voice was steady, but her hands were tight on the console. Echo bombs loaded and primed. 36 emitters across the fleet. Valhari contingent reports battle formation achieved, another officer called out. Elias looked at the tactical display. 243 ships, arranged in the best formation he could manage. A loose cluster, with no fixed pattern, no predictable structure. The Valhari officers had hated it. To them, it looked like disorder. To Elias, it looked like survival. All ships, he said into the fleet-wide channel. This is Commander Voss. What we are about to face does not fight the way you have been trained to fight. It does not shoot. It does not chase. It erases. If you try to fight it with logic, you will die. If you try to outrun it, you will die. Our only advantage is that we can do something it has never encountered before. We can stop making sense. He paused. Somewhere on the channel, a Chivari pilot laughed nervously. Stay random. Stay unpredictable. Trust your instincts over your training. And if you hear Earth music playing on the emergency frequency, that means we're winning. Voss out. They crossed the threshold. It happened instantly. The Void Scar did not wait for them to get comfortable. The moment the first ships passed the invisible line, reality bent. Sensors went wild, displaying readings that contradicted each other. Navigation systems showed the fleet moving in 3 different directions at once. The stars behind them flickered and dimmed, as if the universe was closing a door. And then the Void Scar moved. It advanced like a wave, a wall of nothing that rolled toward the fleet from every direction. It did not come from one place. It came from everywhere. It was below them and above them, and inside the spaces between their ships. The first casualties happened in seconds. A Valhari destroyer on the left flank simply stopped existing. One frame it was on the tactical display. The next frame it was not. No explosion, no debris, no distress signal. The ship and its 400 crew members were just gone, as if they had never been built, never been launched, never been alive. 3 more ships vanished in the next 10 seconds. Panic hit the fleet like a physical force. The Valhari contingent, trained for centuries in disciplined warfare, broke formation and tried to flee. Their instincts told them to retreat to safe space, to regroup, to fight another day. It was the logical thing to do. It was the smart thing to do. It was exactly what the Void Scar expected. The fleeing ships vanished faster than the ones that stayed. The Void Scar consumed them like a predator, picking off the slowest runners. 14 ships erased in 30 seconds. Captains screaming orders into dead channels. Crews who would never know what happened to them. And in the middle of the chaos, Lord Kethavar made his move. He had come with the fleet in secret, hiding aboard the Valhari flagship. The Queen's first blade, her enforcer, her executioner. He had not come to fight the Void Scar. He had come to take control when the human failed. And now, as the fleet tore itself apart, he strode onto the bridge of the flagship and transmitted a command override on the Valhari military frequency. All Valhari ships, this is Lord Kethavar. I am assuming command. Retreat to staging coordinates. The human experiment is over. On the command ship, Mara's console lit up with the override attempt. She looked at Elias. Elias did not look surprised. He's been locked out since day 1, Mara said with the smallest of smiles. I rewired the command codes on our second night at the staging grounds. He can shout all he wants. Nobody's hearing him. Then, let's do what we came here to do. He opened the fleet channel. All ships, execute Pattern 0. I repeat, Pattern 0, now. Pattern 0 was not a pattern. That was the point. Every captain on every ship had received a sealed set of instructions before departure. Inside was a simple order. When Pattern 0 is called, stop following orders, stop coordinating, stop communicating, do whatever feels right. Go wherever instinct takes you. Fight however you want to fight. For the Valhari, this was madness. For the humans, it was Tuesday. The echo bombs fired. 36 emitters across the fleet launched their payloads into the Void Scar, and the void filled with noise. Not weapon fire, not energy blasts, music. A jazz trumpet solo recorded in New Orleans 200 years ago. A child counting to 10 in Mandarin. Rain sounds, static. A woman laughing. The hum of bees on a summer afternoon. Poetry in languages that no longer existed. Random numbers generated by a broken computer. The sound of waves hitting a beach on a planet the Void Scar had never heard of. The Void Scar hesitated. For the first time in its existence, something had entered it that it could not process. It reached for the data and could not categorize it. It tried to erase the signals and found that they meant nothing. And you cannot erase nothing because there is nothing to grab. The chaos slipped through its grip like water through open fingers. And in that moment of hesitation, the fleet scattered. Ships broke in every direction. No formation, no coordination. A Drothi cruiser turned hard to port for no reason, and narrowly avoided being erased. A Shivari frigate reversed its engines and flew backward through a gap in the Void Scar that existed for only 3 seconds. A human corvette began spinning in circles while broadcasting a song about a dog at maximum volume. The Void Scar could not predict any of it. It reached for a ship that was already somewhere else. It tried to consume a destroyer that had stopped dead in space for no logical reason. It lunged at a cluster of fighters that suddenly split into individual ships, moving in 12 different directions. It was working. The impossible, stupid, beautiful plan was working. But the cost was terrible. Ships still vanished. Crews still died. A third of the fleet was gone within the first hour, erased from existence as if they had never been. Vrennik took a falling beam across his back when the command ship's hull buckled under the strain. He went down hard, his stone skin cracked, amber blood pooling beneath him. He looked up at Elias and said through gritted teeth, "Do not stop. Whatever you are doing, do not stop." Mara's engineering section was breached. Vacuum ripped through the lower decks, and she sealed the section with emergency doors and held the ship together with welding tools and raw determination. Her hands were burned. Her suit was torn. She did not stop working. The void scar was contracting now, pulling in on itself, not defeated, but overwhelmed, confused, unable to process the flood of meaningless data and unpredictable movement that the fleet was throwing at it. For the first time in its existence, the thing that erased everything was being pushed back by nothing at all. Elias saw the opening. He left the bridge without a word. He climbed into a shuttle in the hangar bay, a tiny thing barely bigger than a car. Mara's voice came through the comm, raw and hoarse. "Elias, what are you doing?" "Finishing it," he said. He launched the shuttle directly into the heart of the void scar. He opened every channel, every frequency, every emitter on the tiny ship, and he broadcast everything. Every piece of contradictory, beautiful, senseless human data they had left. Music and noise and laughter and crying and silence and chaos and all the glorious, messy, illogical things that humans had created across their short and violent history. The void scar wrapped around his shuttle. He felt it pressing in, felt reality thinning around him, felt the edges of his own existence beginning to fray. And then the void scar screamed. It was not a sound. It was a vibration that passed through every ship, every body, every atom in the region. The thing that had erased star systems and devoured civilizations screamed like a wounded animal, and it collapsed. It folded in on itself, smaller and smaller, until it was a single point of impossible light, hanging in the empty dark. Not destroyed, contained, dormant. Elias's shuttle drifted in the void, systems dead, oxygen failing. The lights on his console flickered once and went out. In the darkness, bleeding and broken, he whispered to no one, "Tell them we didn't kneel." Then everything went black. Mara Osei broke 3 direct orders to save him. The first order came from the acting Velhari commander, who told her the shuttle was lost and the fleet was retreating to safe space. She ignored it. The second came from Dominion Emergency Protocol, which classified the area around the dormant void scar as a no-entry zone. She flew through it. The third came from her own ship's computer, which told her that the hull integrity was at 11%, and that any further stress would tear the vessel apart. She turned the warning off and kept flying. She found the shuttle drifting in the dark, a tiny metal box with no power, no heat, and almost no air left inside. She matched speed, extended the docking clamp, and pulled it in. When she cut open the shuttle door, Elias was unconscious on the floor, his skin pale, his lips blue, his heartbeat so faint that the medical scanner almost missed it. He was alive. She carried him to the medical bay of a ship that was held together with welding tape, emergency patches, and what she later described as sheer stubbornness. And she flew that ship back to Dominion space, with one hand on the controls and one eye on the life support monitor, because the autopilot had died somewhere around the third hull breach. When they reached the Velhari Imperial Station, the Queen sent her personal medical team to take Elias. He was brought to the Velhari healing chambers, a place no human had ever entered. The technology there was centuries ahead of anything humanity had access to. Machines that could rebuild tissue at the cellular level, fluids that carried nutrients directly into the bloodstream through the skin, fields that accelerated healing by manipulating time at a very small scale. Elias slept for 9 days. Mara sat outside the healing chamber for every one of them. Vrennik, his cracked stone skin held together with medical bonding agents, sat beside her. Neither of them spoke much. They did not need to. They had said everything that mattered during the battle. On the 10th day, Elias opened his eyes. He was weak. His body hurt in places he did not know he had. But he was alive, and the first thing he saw was Mara's face looking down at him with an expression that was half relief and half fury. "Don't ever do that again," she said. "Which part?" he asked. "All of it." He sat up slowly. Through the transparent walls of the healing chamber, he could see the station moving around him. Life going on. Species walking the corridors, talking, arguing, living. The Void Scar was contained, sitting in a quarantine zone far from any inhabited system, dormant and silent. The species it had already erased were gone forever, and that grief would last for generations. But it would take no more. The weeks that followed changed the shape of the Dominion. The first thing that happened was the lie. Lord Kethavar returned to the station and immediately began rewriting the story of the battle. In his version, the Velhari military had devised the winning strategy. The human commander had merely been a tool, a weapon pointed in the right direction by superior Velhari minds. Kethavar gave speeches. He held meetings with the High Council. He presented falsified reports that minimized human involvement and elevated Velhari command decisions. It was a good lie, clean and logical. It fit perfectly with what the Dominion wanted to believe. Queen Cyrathale let it run for exactly 12 days. Then, she called a full session of the court, with representatives from every species in the Dominion present. And she played the sensor logs. Every ship in the fleet had recorded the battle. Every angle. Every order. Every moment. The court watched as Elias took command. They watched as the Velhari contingent broke and fled. They watched Kethavar try to seize control and fail. They watched the echo bombs fire and the Void Scar hesitate. They watched the fleet scatter into beautiful chaos. And they watched a single human pilot a shuttle into the heart of an enemy that had destroyed civilizations, armed with nothing but noise and stubbornness. The recordings played for 3 hours. When they ended, the court was silent. Not the weaponized silence of the Velhari, but the real silence of people who had just seen something they could not deny. Kethavar stood in the center of the court, exposed. His lies stripped away in front of every species he had ever claimed dominance over. His armor patterns flickered with colors that the Velhari associated with deep shame, colors he could not control no matter how hard he tried. He did what any Velhari warrior would do when cornered. He challenged Elias to a death duel. Elias was still recovering. He could stand, but barely. His hands shook when he gripped anything too tightly. His lungs ached from the oxygen deprivation he had suffered in the shuttle. He should have refused the challenge. Nobody would have blamed him. He accepted. But before the duel could begin, a massive stone hand landed on Elias's shoulder and gently pushed him back. Vrennik stepped forward. The Drothi towered over everyone in the room, his repaired skin gleaming like polished granite, his amber eyes fixed on Kethavar with a look that contained no anger, no hatred, only a vast and ancient certainty. "I hold a life debt to this human," Vrennik said. His voice filled the throne room like thunder in a canyon. "His fight is my fight. I stand in his place." Kethavar hesitated. Vrennik did not. The duel lasted less than 2 minutes. Vrennik moved like an avalanche, slow at first, and then unstoppable. Kethavar was fast and skilled and lethal, but the Drothi was something older, something that had been fighting since before the Velhari built their first city. Kethavar's blade struck Vrennik's skin and shattered. Vrennik caught the first blade by his throat, lifted him off the ground, and held him there. Then he set him down, alive, unharmed, and he turned his back on him. In Drothi culture, this was the deepest insult one warrior could give another. It meant the enemy was not worth killing. It meant they were so far beneath you that ending their life would be a waste of effort. Kethavar stood in the center of the court, alive and untouched, and he had never been more defeated in his life. After that, Queen Sirathale summoned Elias one final time. Not at midnight, not during the deep cycle. She summoned him at the dawn cycle, the hour the Valhari reserved for new beginnings. The court assembled again, but the mood was different this time. Lighter. The vassal species stood taller in their tiers. The Chivari diplomat, Ambassador Taylani, was smiling. The queen stood before her throne. She did not sit above him this time. She stood at his level, as she had done that first night. Humanity has earned what no other species has earned in the history of this dominion, she said, a seat on the High Council, not as a vassal, as an equal. The court made sounds of surprise and approval and fear, all mixed together. A seat on the High Council, full representation, full rights, for a species that had been considered barely more than clever animals 40 years ago. Elias bowed his head. "I'll accept," he said, "with one condition." The court groaned. Even Mara, standing behind him, closed her eyes and muttered something under her breath. "The submission accords are abolished," Elias said. "Every vassal species in the Dominion gets the right to govern themselves. Full autonomy. No exceptions." The court fell silent. This was not what anyone had expected. Humanity had just been offered the greatest prize in the galaxy, and their representative was using it to free everyone else. Queen Sirathale regarded him for a long time. For the first time that anyone could remember, she hesitated. The patterns on her armor flickered with uncertainty. "You would spend your power on other species," she said, "instead of securing more for your own." "Yes," Elias said. "Why?" Elias looked at the court. He looked at the Shivari and the Drothi and the Ulm and all the other species who had spent decades with their heads bowed. He looked at Vrennik, who stood behind him like a mountain. He looked at Mara, who had flown a broken ship through impossible space to save him. "Because that's what humans do," he said. "We don't just fight for ourselves. We fight for everyone who is told to kneel." The queen was still for a long moment. Then the patterns on her armor shifted again, to that strange color that nobody had been able to identify. That color that had first appeared when Elias demanded conditions in the throne room. The translators had been working on it for weeks, cross-referencing every known Valhari emotional state, every historical record, every biological database. Now, finally, they had an answer. The color meant respect. The queen dipped her head, a fraction of an inch. In 300 years, she had never bowed to anyone. The submission accords were abolished that day. That evening, Elias stood on the observation deck of the station, wearing his Earth military dress uniform, the same one he had put on the night of the first summons. The medals were still pinned to his chest. The silver buttons still caught the light. Through the viewport, the stars stretched out in every direction, bright and steady, burning the way stars were supposed to burn. Mara walked up beside him. She stood quietly for a while, looking out at the same stars. "So what happens now?" she asked. It was a tired smile, the kind that comes after a very long journey. But it was real. "Now," he said, "now we make some noise." Mara laughed. It was a good laugh, warm and loud and completely uncontrolled. It echoed off the walls of the observation deck and rang through the corridors beyond, and for a moment the old silence of the station broke. Across the galaxy on 100 different worlds, in 1,000 different languages, the news spread. The accords were gone. The vassal species were free, and it was a human who had done it. A single human who had refused to kneel, who had flown into the heart of an impossible enemy with nothing but chaos and courage, and who had used the greatest victory in galactic history to set everyone else free. The Velhari would write about it in their crystal archives. The Drati would carve it into their memory stones. The Chivari would sing about it in frequencies that humans could not hear. Every species would tell the story in their own way, in their own language, with their own understanding of what it meant. But they would all agree on one thing. The galaxy had been silent for a very long time. Ordered, controlled, quiet. And then the humans came, and they were loud and messy and chaotic and impossible. And they broke the silence in a way that could never be repaired. And the sound of that breaking was the most beautiful thing the stars had ever heard.